Dzień dobry Państwu, witam Państwa serdecznie. Minęła godzina 16, więc chyba pora już zaczynać. Witam Państwa wszystkich na kolejnej już debacie pod tytułem Co znaczy być Europejczykiem. Muzeum Łazienki Królewskie i Fundacja imienia profesora Bronisława Geremka ma zaszczyt po raz trzeci już organizować debatę z cyklu Śród Europejskich. Jak Państwo może wiecie, idea ta wyszła jeszcze z Śród Europejskich organizowanych przez Château de Lunéville i koncepcja tychże śród jest taka, aby stały się one takim pomostem łączącym nas, Łazienki Królewskie i Fundację profesora Geremka z naszymi partnerskimi instytucjami, jakimi właśnie są Lunéville oraz Bad Muskau. Jak już mówiłam, po raz trzeci organizujemy dzisiaj wspólnie tą debatę, ale jest ona zupełnie różna od debat poprzednich. Zazwyczaj zapraszaliśmy Państwa do sytuacji, kiedy tutaj na scenie zasiadali wybitni profesorowie, którzy prowadzili tą debatę, wypowiadali się, dyskutowali. A dzisiaj sytuacja zupełnie niezwykła. Profesor Richard Butterwick wraz ze studentami Kolegium Europejskiego w Natolinie z wybranymi studentami, z grupą studentów, która się zgłosiła. Będzie właśnie debatować nad tym, co to znaczy być Europejczykiem, więc głos młodego pokolenia. Tutaj patrzę na dyrektora Instytutu Adama Mickiewicza i zastanawiam się, czy to są nasi milenialsi, pokolenie Y i czy to będzie głos właśnie tego nowego pokolenia milenialsów. Zobaczymy. Ja jeszcze pozwolę sobie przywitać prezes Fundacji imienia profesora Geremka, panią Jolantę Kurską. Serdecznie witamy i dziękujemy za fantastyczną współpracę. I panie profesorze, oddaję panu głos, oddaję panu scenę.
Pani dyrektor, pani prezesko, w imieniu Kolegium Europejskiego w Natolinie, naszych kolegów, naszych studentów bardzo serdecznie dziękuję za przywilej właśnie występowania w tej przepięknej sali, właśnie udekorowanej według myśli mojego bohatera, króla Stanisława Augusta, ponad 200 lat temu. Jest to niezwykłe doświadczenie dla nas. Odtąd, chyba dla wygody większości, będę mówił po angielsku. It is a great privilege and an honor for the students and the teachers and staff of the College of Europe to be able to debate the matter which is at the heart of everything we do at Natolin here in the ballroom of the Łazienki Palace in Warsaw. The debate is organized in cooperation with the Professor Bronisław Geremek Foundation, with whom we have deepened our cooperation significantly in the last year and a half. We have, for example, already reached a decision on the award of the first Bronisław Geremek Prize for an outstanding work of history in the field of European civilization, which will be awarded this December. And this debate, as has been mentioned by the director, is the third in a series in which the College of Europe at Natolin has taken part. But it is the first occasion on which our students have taken part. And this is what I think makes today's occasion so particularly special. The chair of European civilization at the College of Europe, founded by the European Parliament in memory and in honor of Bronisław Geremek, is founded with a mission to encourage thinking about Europe in the broadest possible context, in the longest possible context, with a view to reimagine what is possible for the future of Europe in the light of what has been achieved in the past. We have 6 students from very different backgrounds, disciplinary backgrounds and national backgrounds. But what I am not going to do today is tell you which country they are from, which is usually the case. You may well be able to guess in some cases, but I shall introduce them simply by their first names, with the view that you would assess what they have to say rather than judge on the basis of what country they come from. So, the subject, what does it mean to be European? Each of the participants on the panel will have no more than 5 minutes, and I will be enforcing that quite strictly. And then after that, there'll be an opportunity for each of the panelists to make a comment on one other thing that one of the other panelists has said, one of the themes that has come up. And at that point, we open it up to the floor. And I do appeal to everyone to keep your questions short and to the point. And also to the panelists that they keep their answers short and to the point, so that as many people as possible can participate in an exchange of thought. And at the end of the debate, there'll be the showing of a film when a number of other students, including one of those at the College of Europe at Natolin, has asked what they think it means to be a European. first student I'm going to ask to answer this question is Christina.
Thank you. Thank you all of you for coming. So, let me take this. So, what does it mean to be European for me? I would start first to ask, what is Europe? Is it a subcontinent? A way of living? A concept? Maybe a myth? A dream or a hope, as Jacques Le Goff affirmed a decade ago? Europe's history started with the kidnapping of a young mortal by a selfish god. Later on, in the medieval ages, what we currently call Europe was the Christianitas, only seen as the Christendom fortress, but with some territories occupied. Then came the wars of religion and the 30 Years' War that led us to the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. Thus, the religion would be an important point of the European cultural identity back in the 17th and 18th century. But was this peace the beginning in the whole subcontinent of taking the religion out from the public sphere, allowing a more civic and political public identity? This would then mean that an enormous group of people evolved together into a same perception of a concept, pointing out that European might share a cultural identity. What do I mean by cultural identity? The self-perception and self-representation of ourselves as a part of a group where all the members share some particular feelings. For instance, most of us share Christmas festivities due to our common Christian heritage, or the 11th of November holiday because of the First World War armistice. But do we really feel it? I don't think so. Because we don't even think about it for the simple reason that it is just normal and taken for granted. In this way, while traveling around Europe, we usually see our differences between country traditions, which contrasts with our feelings when traveling across the world, where this impression may change, claiming that we come from Europe. Besides, there are also people who, geographically and politically speaking, don't feel European, not even outside its boundaries. Consequently, in our homeland, and in the rest of Europe, we may feel our nationality stronger, whereas outside Europe, this feeling tends to be reverted for most of us. On account of this, I'm firmly convinced that if we want a more united Europe, first, we should work on our combined identity or even identities. Because as past and present are related, so is the future. And while talking about the past and present, I got a very personal feeling that I want to express here. To be or not to be European is a choice and not an imposition. When Zeus kidnapped Europe, he did not probably realize what his action will mean for millennia. He took her to a new land against her will, imposing her a destination. This is not anymore what to be European means. As Europe is a land of cultural sharing, the so-called European is a person decided to share a kind of values, hopes, and dreams. It is a person who welcomes economic migrants, who dream about a better life by working hard. It is also a person who hosts those refugees escaping war, because Europe is a land of peace and solidarity from its deepest roots. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina, for taking us back to those deepest roots of Europe and for making a really quite fundamental point that the original Europa did not have a choice, but we do. The next student I'd like to ask to answer the question is Chris.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you very much for having us. Similar to Christina, I'm going to go down more of a historical perspective, but I'm going to bring it through to the modern era. And I basically have 3 words to take you through that sum up my view on European identity. The first word is about peace. And we all know what's happened in the 20th century. We all know the 2 world wars and the destruction they caused. And we all know that afterwards the European integration project came into being to make sure that this wouldn't happen again. Europe has not been completely spared from conflict. As we all know, there have been wars in the Balkans, in Georgia, and today in Ukraine. But within the union of countries that has constituted the community and then the union, there has not been conflict. And so in that respect, it's been very successful, and I'm quite happy that I don't have to go killing my fellow Europeans anymore. But more importantly, perhaps, we've moved on from that. It's about more than just preventing us from killing each other. It's about being united in many different ways. And so the big word that's come about is solidarity. And of course, in Poland, it's a very important word, and it's arguably where it came from for the rest of Europe too. Coming from Western Europe, that primarily was about supporting the Central Europeans and Eastern Europeans as they came out of communism. And in the 90s, I think we did a good job of being solid. But there's more than that. There's a lot of policies that we have to deal with now, and we are lacking solidarity in the face of them. Whether it's the refugee crisis or energy or economic development between West and East, North and South, bailing out countries that are struggling, climate change, or even war now, we aren't showing solidarity that we were able to show 15 years ago. And it's a disappointment. And I don't want to say that a lack of solidarity is becoming what it is to be European, but we risk going down that road. I hope it doesn't happen. And so that brings me on to the third word, which I want Europe to have, and that is ambition. Because peace and solidarity are very important values to what it is to be Europe, and it is our lack of ambition as Europeans at the moment that is stopping us from reaching those 2 words properly. We've got to go beyond the Franco-German fiddling with Europe, like at the edges, making sure the core works, and we have to think broader. We have to prevent things like Brexit. We have to fight nationalism in whatever country it's in, whether it's the UK or Hungary or further east still. We have to think big. We have to remember that Europe, a peaceful Europe, was not just about France and Germany. It was about from Reykjavik in Iceland to the end of Russia. It was all of it. So we have to dare to dream, we have to dare to enlarge, we have to dare to support those countries in areas that they need support in. It's only with ambition that we're going to bring about a Europe of peace and solidarity. So we're going to need all 3 words. I just wanted to end on, since I came to Warsaw, I've got involved with some young people here called the Young European Federalists, and they're a glimmer of hope. They are showing that ambition. They are showing that people in Poland also can show that solidarity with everyone in Europe, whether it's southern, western, northern, eastern, and to bring about something better. And it needs to not just be a few young people in Warsaw and Krakow, it needs to be people everywhere. All Europeans need to take that on board.
Thank you very much, Chris, for emphasizing the breadth of the European ambition and the foundation in peace and solidarity. The third student I'm going to ask is Michele.
Yes, first of all, thank you to the organizer to give us this opportunity to make a nice discussion in this beautiful place, really amazing. A general agreement between elite, intellectual, political, economic, about the answer to the Hamletic question, what does it mean to be European? It will sound probably like that. First, to share a big space of liberty and prosperity. Second, to share a great historical and cultural heritage full of contradiction. Third, to be part of a courageous, difficult and conflicting process of political unification. We could probably easily find empirical data and historical proof of this assumption. And we could recall in support the spirit of Benedetto Croce and his idea of Europe as an history of freedom, or the concept of constitutional patriotism given by Jürgen Habermas. But what about the feeling of the people? Today, in the heart and mind of a large number of citizens, maybe the majority, Europe is not the European Union, and to be European is not to be EU citizens. And this is not only the result of the pressure of populist and radical forces, climbing for a Europe different from the European Union, a Europe of nations, a Europe of peoples, or Europe of the people, or social Europe, but also an ongoing defiance versus the institution in general, also the national ones, and of a growing common sense of skepticism and often anger, particularly versus the European Commission and the other EU institutions, as a sort of strange leviathan, this gentle monster of Brussels, as named by the well-known German writer Hans Magnus Enzensberger. Then recognizing people's mentality and elite vision is once again the task of democratic intellectuals capable to go outside from the golden cage of universities and institutions and shaping a new path and pact towards a new Res Publica Europea of aware citizens. The idea of a Res Publica, of the Republic, in fact, it's maybe at the end of the day the implicit core of the European identity, often hidden in history but constantly returning in act. According to Federico Chabot, a great Italian historian, author of History of the Idea of Europe, the first formulation of Europe as a community with a specific character, not only geographical or religious, is that one of Niccolò Machiavelli in The Art of the War. Europe as the only part of the world which had qualche regno e infinite repubbliche. It has some kingdom and infinite republics, or infinite republics. To be European means to be part of this particular type of political organization. Republic, as the pure direct democracy of Athens or the mixed regime of Rome, or as the Italian communes or the free cities of Hanseatic League, or at least not absolute monarchy, opposed to the Asia dominated by the form of absolute monarchy. From the time of the Persian Empire to Ottoman Empire, and now maybe the ISIS project, and somehow also China and Russia. But what about this new republic? A republic as a government of the people, by the people, for the people. This is not an European quotation, this is Lincoln, as you know, which integrate representative democracy with new form of deliberative and direct democracy, capable of overcoming populism by the participation of the citizen in the responsibility of the decision on the common good, in a plurality of forms, not only at the moment of political elections. But a new republic also in another sense, a republic of republics, a federation of republics, the United States of Europe, as a federal union in progress, open to the other regions of the globe. This is an ancient idea since the Projet pour rendre la paix perpétuelle en Europe of the Abbé de Saint-Pierre, discussed also by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, with an influence on Immanuel Kant and his visionary zum ewigen Frieden, the perpetual peace, partially inspired also by the Federalist Papers of Madison, up to the Manifesto of Ventotene of Altiero Spinelli, whose name is inscribed over the entrance of European Parliament in Brussels. And in that sense, work in that direction, elite and people together as free and equal citizens of a common republic to come, to be European is to be also cosmopolitan. If it's true that only a word of federate republics can be the word of peace of the finally reunified humankind. And sorry for my bad English.
Thank you very much, Michele. Drawing our attention to Europe is but a stepping stone to a wider human unity. And the sheer scale of the ambitions here, the emphasis on a republican kind of citizenship, and where better to do that than in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The next student I'm going to ask to answer the question is Kardelen.
Excuse me. Thank you, and thanks everyone so much for coming. And I would like to start by sharing with you what I wrote in when I was applying to be a speaker in this panel. Here's what I said. To me, being European means no longer being surprised when you cross a frontier. If you can sleep through a frontier without noticing anything and wake up in a foreign country that is no longer foreign, you are European. It means being able to adopt a country without ever being questioned about your motives, choosing your life regardless of the hazards of birth. It is the freedom from ambition, the possibility of becoming a greengrocer in Strasbourg if you want to, without condemning yourself to a life within the borders of a single country, not let out into the wider world without a million documents, and all of a financial nature, I must add. If the opportunity to travel the world on a shoestring, at your digression, without ever being questioned about the reason, with hardly a glance at any gate anywhere, that's being European. It is the increased possibility of being the product of an intercultural union, or making one yourself. It is being part of being something bigger than yourself. It is also the possibility to take all these for granted. Being European is the luxury of being Eurosceptic. Being European is the freedom to define who you are and to be what you want. As you can see, my take on this is not really about any political or legal framework. All those things, they exist to help you achieve the things I've just described. Being European is not about borders or fiscal policy. It comes from shared references, a common understanding of what is possible, and what one can expect from the world. Personally, I feel utterly and completely European, unbound by any national identity, although I come from a country whose identities many consider to be completely non-European, and in light of the recent developments, myself as well, most of the time. Europe is in the languages I have learned. It's in the books I've read, and most importantly, it's in the people I've met. It is about which conversations I would rather have and how much more at home I feel wherever I go. It is a state of mind rather than a place to be. And then there is resistance to both personal opinions and the idea of Europe itself. I personally have no doubts about how I define myself, but it does not mean that my identity comes without any complications. Not the least because I'm not allowed to have regular access to the things I feel define me. People like to be in groups with defined boundaries to the detriment of the other. This has been well documented throughout history. The idea that there are people who are undefined and undefinable is very scary for some people. I think a major part of the reason why there is so much resistance to the idea of Europe is that it blurs the boundaries of national and cultural identity, willing people to ignore their preconceptions of both themselves and the other to form something completely new and exciting. The beauty of it is that it doesn't have to be the same for everyone. That's why we're having a panel on what it means. It offers the perfect refuge to people who have a complicated relationship with their identity, or who would rather not be defined within a narrow framework of national characteristics and stereotypes. But at the same time, it scares people who would rather not think about who they are and what their place is in the world. Especially in light of recent political developments in the EU, it is scary for me personally to think that there are young people out there who are even more attached to their narrow understanding of who they are and themselves and their identity than their parents and grandparents ever were. However, it is important to underline that even these people still take full advantage of everything, and I mean everything, the European construction offers them. For me though, beyond all that, and as I have said, it is something cultural rather than institutional, which is why I feel like I can identify much more with the European identity than the one people immediately assume I have. For me, it is not about where you're from, it is about who you feel you belong with. And it does sometimes seem like I don't belong anywhere.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, for giving us a personal insight into the tremendous freedom that Europe can offer. If I were to sort of try and put my finger on it, it will be above all freedom from fear. You also pointed out to those elements of fear which continue to surround us. The next student I'd like to ask to answer the question is Stefan.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to share with you one of my experiences. When I received the invitation for this panel and I saw the question, I found out that this was one of the questions of my childhood. Why? Because the political discourse and the social discourse in my country in the 90s was that my country someday will join Europe. I didn't know what do they mean because, of course, it was about joining the European Union. I was taught in school that, well, we are in Europe, so why we should join Europe? So yeah, I was in a big dilemma at the moment. Anyway, so it's impossible to answer this question without discussing what the European identity is, and even questioning whether it exists or represents merely an empty concept. For more than 30 years already, scholars in Brussels and technocrats have struggled to define the common European identity that may fully legitimize the entire European project. In addressing European identity, current literature offers several competing views. On the one hand, it is perceived as a continuous process, a real entity. Its presence is proven and supported by various phenomena, such as migration, or media coverage of European issues. On the other hand, some scholars argue that a sense of European identity began to develop, and that a growing number of Europeans identify in one way or another with Europe or European Union. According to RISE, currently a number of European citizens include Europe in their sense of identity. In other words, they have Europeanized national identities, even if only as a secondary identity. At the same time, many scholars agree that European identity is neither a real entity waiting to be explored, nor a feature firmly attached to individuals, but rather a theoretical construct, a form lacking content, an empty shell. Finally, and most recently, researchers agree that intellectual debate should focus on European identities in plural. There is no one European identity, as there is no one single Europe, as Katzenstein puts it. And here, I will agree also with Anthony Smith in saying that Europeans are perfectly content with their multiple identities. Apart from the theoretical perspectives, some institutional factors are forging European identity daily, beginning with the Declaration on the European Identity of 1973, to the European flag and anthem, both adopted in 1985, to the European citizenship created by the Maastricht Treaty, and ending with the famous Erasmus program. And let me give you an example. A recent study shows that around 1 million babies were born thanks to the Erasmus program. And imagine a family made of a Spanish man with an Italian mother, a baby born in France and raised in Belgium. What that baby is if not European. However, the absence of a unique language, a uniform education system, a European constitution, and most importantly, the absence of uniform policies towards all the EU countries and the lack of an EU army make the whole project of constructing an European identity a form lacking content, just an empty shell for the moment, which maybe in the future will have to be filled with Europeanness. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, for pointing to this nice balance between challenges, this emphasis on the empty shell, this emphasis that Europe is not the same as the EU, and things that have happened. 1 million babies on the Erasmus program. That's the statistic I'm going to remember. The last of our 6 students to answer the question, I'm going to ask Alexander.
Thank you, Professor. Before I commence, I must recall a situation that took place yesterday. At the college, Michela asked me what's my argument, what are my arguments for today, and the point is there is no argument at all. Warning. A pinch of romantic flair and a tad of a flamboyant licentia poetica seem very much in order to approach this overwhelming question. If you ask, however, then please take a deep breath and let me answer. You, a kid born in a mining town somewhere in Central Europe, who came of age in that same town only to leave it for good out of sheer ignorance of what's out there, and to leave it for good and for another not too small but not too large town either, 1,000 miles away, you who struggled to make a living in foreign lands, soon to discover you have been falling in love with these lands multiple times, and that they are home to you now, just as your home back there somehow still remains, where your loved ones remained, but new loved ones now exist too, and they are very distant to each other. However, you hold them dear the same way anyway, and realize all this did not happen elsewhere, but rather right here. You say, rather right here all along. I see you as this mad teenager on your way to adulthood and maturity. You struggle against feelings and thoughts and ideas. You only manage to fight your way forward because you do not know this is the hardest struggle you could ever imagine. For maturity is certainly not for everybody, but who knows whether it is for you, and now you only know you must go. 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 Be advised though, hear Luis Garcia Montero, a Spanish poet, saying, "Nobody shall bathe in tears twice at the same airport, for there are planes that take off from nowhere, and nowhere they land." You are in peril indeed. You could as well board one of these planes and not return, for you would have forgotten what was the word for home here. What would you do then? How would you love? And oh my, do you know there is many of you suffering this hardship, and that you are supposed to build something together for the sake of children you may never see thrive and prosper. Jan Martel was right when he wrote, "Indeed, from my earliest years, the idea of transformation has been central to my life. I changed schools, languages, countries, and continents a number of times during my childhood. At each change, I had the opportunity to recreate myself, to present a new facade, to bury past errors and misrepresentations. Now I say, while you were roaring down that road, your homesickness was replaced with a love for any place." Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Homesickness becoming a love of any place possible through Europe. Well, you've certainly given us the poetics of Europe there. I'm sure we appreciate that. Now, we've had 6 very diverse contributions, which represent just some of the diversity of the student body at the College of Europe. We have people from 30 different countries. Among those who have been speaking today, we've had all of the 4 corners of Europe and beyond the EU, as well as from old and new member states. I'd now like to ask members of the panel if they would like to comment on one of the things that they've heard from the other panelists, before we then open it up to the floor.
On Michele's emphasis on republics, I can see a point to it, but at the same time, I wouldn't want to over-egg it. I wouldn't want to over-exaggerate, because, for example, there are some countries in Europe still that are not republics and do not behave very much at all like a republic. In fact, there are 2 theocracies in Europe. There are only 3 in the world, so that's pretty backward. So we still have some work to do if we're going to get your republic of republics properly going.
Would you like to respond, Michele?
I think also there is a problem on definition of republic. For example, a professor of the college, we debate about what is a republic. He say also, there are also what is a republic, what is democracy. You have also democracy with monarchy, so it's also a difficult question of definition. Maybe if you take the definition of Cicero, res publica is something more you can take more wide, like a form of government where all the citizens are involved in the decision on the common good. So in that sense, you can have also a monarchy. Like, I mean, Denmark is a is a parliamentary democracy with a monarchy, like a lot of state in Europe. But maybe you can name also this type of state republic. So is if I understood the question.
Well, since I've been sort of cited here, I suppose I could say that if you think about the etymology of the word, republic means common good. In other words, we're back to this idea of all of the citizens playing an active part in discussing and reaching that common good. So a process which is by its very nature a very difficult process, but it's a process which, if we abandon, then we're just sort of abandoning ourselves to the rule of others. It may be an enlightened and beneficent rule, and it may be a tyrannical rule, but ultimately it's something over which we can have no control. Okay, other comments on the others? Alexander.
I would like to take Christina's point on this because I find it very accurate. On the stronger sense of nationality of a European that goes abroad, which wins against the feeling of EU nationality or EU citizenship, sort of. It's a very interesting problem, and I would always compare it to the conversation one might have with the Americans. When I love when they say, usually when they speak about their origins, because in the States everybody comes from somewhere else, they say I'm Greek or I'm Italian or I'm, of course first they would say I'm American or I'm from New York, but at some point they just say they wouldn't say that they come from, originally my family comes from Italy or Greece or etc., etc. They would say, I'm Greek. And I wonder whether this will happen at some point in case of Europeans, that we would put our European identity first, but then if you dig deeper, you'd say, yes, but I'm Polish. It might be an abstract point, but that's how I feel it.
Well, especially I was thinking when I went to the States some years ago, that happened to me actually. When I was saying where I came from, they didn't know where my country was. So I started saying that I came from Europe. And then they knew where to put Europe in the map. So during that time, it's when I really started to feel like European. Because since then I felt more from my country or both my countries rather than European.
Thank you. Any more comments on some of the other panelists? Michaela?
There's a question to Stefan, but maybe some more also for Oleg and Cardelan. You told this very nice story about a baby that have a multiple identity, multiple nationality, and also you told about the fact that was with Maastricht was established also European citizenship. But in reality, at the moment we have not a real European citizenship. That means to be European citizen, you have to be also Italian citizen, Spanish citizen, Polish citizen, whatever, Romanian citizen, English citizen. But what about the possibility to give citizenship just European citizen? Also for the migrants, they are coming here and they are starting to work maybe first in Italy, then in Germany, then in Sweden. Why we cannot? What do you think about the possibility to give directly European citizenship and also to give the possibility to the European parents to give European citizenship and not national one? Also because we have a multiple situation as described by Stefan argument. So it's a question for you, but maybe also for
Okay, I'll try to answer. I don't know actually if I know how to answer to this. The thing is that citizenship is official, right? So citizenship gives a nation the let's say the official nationality. You are Pakistanis because you have a Pakistanese citizenship, right? Apart from this, of course, there is this supranational identity of Europe, and the Treaty of Maastricht gave this European citizenship, and that's why on your ID card you have the European flag, or all of us, right? So it's only, I suppose, a formal, as I said in my speech, it's just the form, the shell. This is just the form that in the future might build the entire European identity. So we need symbols. The symbols are part of constructing a nation. The flag, the citizenship, the anthem, these are all symbols, or even after this comes the culture. That's everything I can say at the moment.
Well, I actually wouldn't mind, but I can't even imagine the technical nightmares that's involved with it. Because we're talking about institutions, like citizenship comes with a lot of things. It comes with taxes, it comes with a lot of legal construction, basically. So I wouldn't even begin to imagine what that would involve. But as an idea, why not? As Stefan said, you need, for citizenship, you need a nation, but that's just because we made it that way. We made it up 200 years ago. So we can make something new up. That's what life is. So why not?
Okay. Alexander?
I take your point, Cardelan. I wanted to take your point before anyway. And commenting on what Stefan has just said, I'd very much prefer, although I believe there are many people who would strongly disagree with your stance on this, especially in this, during this time of raising nationalisms and raising nationalism also in this country. That before we envision this enormous project of imagining a European citizenship as an independent entity, I very much applaud the idea of the ultimate freedom that you have spoken about, the freedom of not belonging anywhere, which I personally do not see as a bad thing. but it's not an easy thing to live with, because it's demanding. It demands a lot of thought to give to. Thank you.
The response, the freedom of not belonging anywhere might potentially give rise to the danger of not feeling any responsibility or any sense of duty towards anywhere. Do you feel that there's a serious danger in this kind of extreme freedom to choose whoever you want to be, that it would lead to an abandonment of the other side of what Michele's referred to as the republic, the sort of active involvement of citizens?
No, not necessarily. Do you only care about people and your responsibilities just because you're from the same nationality, or you speak the same language, or you're from the same religion? If that's what makes you care, I think that's not a good thing anyway. So no, I'd say no.
All right, well, we've had a good exchange of views there. I'd now like to sort of gain some more comments and questions from the audience. As I say, please do keep them short. You can ask them in either English or Polish, then the translation will come through into the other language. I'm not going to call anyone by name, even though I know some of the people present, because it would not be fair to call some people by name and others. So, gentleman over there.
Ja chciałem się spytać, czy można nazwać Europejczykiem Francuza urodzonego na przykład w Algierii, mającego obywatelstwo francuskie, ale nie uznającego praw francuskich, nie będącego chrześcijaninem ani ateistą i będącego zagorzałym na przykład islamistą. Ma obywatelstwo francuskie. Czy jego można nazwać Europejczykiem?
Przepraszam, czy pan zwrócił się do poszczególnego panelisty, czy do wszystkich? Okay, so whoever would like to answer this one. Okay, did any of you get that? Alexander, would you perhaps like to start, since you certainly understood it? And if you could start by summarizing the question.
Yes, the point is whether we can call a European person born in, a French person born in Algeria, tak? I przebywającego we Francji, who's an Islamist extremist and do not share the laws of the country he lives in. I hope that was a correct rendition. I would prefer to say this is a difficult question, but it is actually very easy. Because the problems that you have pointed out, mixed origins, extreme religious stance, this is a separate question. It doesn't allow us to answer whether that person can be called a European or not. That they don't share a value, that they do not respect the law, that they want to harm other people. It has nothing to do with being European or French or Chinese. That's about being a violent, probably a hurt person anyway, before.
If I understood it correctly, the question is whether someone like an Islamic extremist born in France would be considered European.
The question was whether a person who is of French nationality but was born elsewhere and lives in France but do not share the respect for its laws and is not a Christian and is not an atheist but rather an extreme Muslim, whether they can be called European.
Well, I think the fact that even this question is asked and even this problem and viewpoints exist comes from the fact that people would like to be in defined groups at the expense of the other. And in this case, it goes for both for French people and for whichever community that person comes from. So I think that's actually part of the problem, that questions like these are asked because such disparities exist. I mean, if being European could be about your language or religion, and on both sides, I emphasize that, but then you wouldn't even need to ask that question. Breaking the law obeying the law is not a condition for being European. There are European murderers, there are European serial killers, there are European dictators, so, well.
Actually,
Okay,
if I can,
thank you. I think we'll take the next question. The gentleman in the second row in the brown jumper.
Yeah, thanks for the speeches. They were all good. I'm thankful for it. Stefan, you will talk about citizenship. Chris, about youngsters, about the engagement of the young people, as in Poland, in the JEF. You talked as well about Erasmus, which was very famous and had an impact on the definition or on the European identity. So I'm asking me the question because we are here, some of us are studying at the College of Europe, and it's an educational program more for the elites, which is a problem you pointed out as well, Michele. So I'm wondering if the European Union or the countries in the European Union are not doing enough regarding the civic education at school, for example. A school where always a place where the identities of the national countries, like in the 19th century, well built up. So I'm wondering if we are not enough ambitious here. Thanks.
Thank you. Stefan?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I pointed out in my speech that one of the factors why we still are in the empty shell is that we don't have a unified education system. Because you in your country, you don't study what I study in my country. Because we still live in this national-oriented Europe. So, because my school curricula is different from your school curricula, even if maybe we study the same about the French Revolution, maybe we study different things. Because this is where we live now.
I do wonder whether a theoretical European-wide uniform education system could possibly do justice to the diversity of traditions and heritages within Europe, whether in order to give it some kind of coherence, it would necessarily privilege some kinds of Europe over other types of Europe, and that in practice it would be the kind of Europe that is located in the quadrilateral between Paris, Frankfurt, Amsterdam and London.
Well, to answer you, I come from a country where we don't have a national education, and that doesn't make us less united. I don't see the point to have a European education. We already share our culture, our common history, and we all study that, okay, from our national point of view sometimes, but also from a whole historical point of view, because all our histories are related. So what else do you want to study it all together?
Okay, thank you. I was speaking from the point of view of nationalism. In order to build Europe, you need to have an educational system which can build Europe, in the sense that you want to build Europe. Because in this kind of institutionalized nationalism, you have institutions who build the nation, and thus, if you want to build a European nation, then you need a European education system.
I agree.
I suppose.
But I rather not. But in our country, all regions, all like little, we are kind of a federation country. we all have different systems of, it's the same system of education, but we all study different things. Even at university, we still study different things. That doesn't, in some places, maybe there are some more national feeling, but still, we don't have any problem to be a whole nation. So I understand your point. Maybe we should go and share some subjects, some ideas, but it'll be on the very long term, I think.
I think that if the European process of unification is unification in the diversity, we need element of unification. So what maybe Benjamin was suggesting was not a uniform education over all the Europe, but some common elements. So for example, I don't know, 2 hours per week of civic education. Sometimes also you have only in theory, I think to Italy, for example, in theory we need, in the program is written you will have civic education on Italian constitution, but at the end you have not. So let's imagine that these 2 hours are for Europe civic education, about institution, about history of Europe, and about that. And maybe also is our task. When you study history in your country, maybe you study still a type of history that is a history of the nation that was built, no? But you have not a perspective on, if you are Italian or British, you have not a perspective on East Europe. And also, maybe we need, you utilize poetry, maybe we need common canon of European literature. For example, I discovered Goethe only at university. No, this is tremendous. You study Dante in Italy, you study Manzoni, you don't study Goethe. But you don't know Mickiewicz. What's the name of the Greek Pole? Mickiewicz. Maybe it can be interesting also to study that in England and in Italy. No, so some common unified elements, and we have this problem, and I conclude with that, also in universities. So we have different type of system of selection for the university. If university wants to be like the place where you selected also the intellectual elite, if you want, you need to unify that. At least at this level, you have to have some uniformity, I think. Sorry.
So you want to build some kind of European identity from the top to down? Yes. You're mentioning from the institutions, from the top to down, from the education.
Like the education is top to down anyway. So one of the, when they teach you grammar, the Spanish grammar is top to down. So at least you need some top to down education. Yes, this is normal. And the education is like that. Also in the college we have some lecture top to down, but we debate. So this is also the way in which you teach can be different. The logic. Also, you can say at least you have, as a European citizen, you have to know 2 foreign language more than your mother language. Even if you have 2 mother languages, you have to learn 2 other languages, because to learn a foreign language is also a question of respect of another culture, for example. So you can also, I think that the European Parliament can make some directive or regulation about that, also the Commission, more than, this is a stereotype, more on the dimension of the apple, so this is the typical stereotype.
You're certainly setting some ambitious goals there. Perhaps we can have another question from the floor.
Well, thanks very much to the panelists. This question goes primarily to Christina, but of course all of you are welcome to answer it. You spoke of being European as a choice, and I certainly see that if you were born in Europe, then you have all the choices there are. But my question would be, how can you become a European if you are not born in Europe, if at all?
Thanks for your question. Yes, it's a choice and not an imposition. Maybe as we were already born here, we feel it may be more as an imposition than a choice. As I've said, also, for me, being European is sharing. So if you share, related to the question before, if you share the same kind of values that we're trying to promote, if you share the same dreams, the same vision of future, I think it's how you can become European. It's more a feeling rather than a paper with a stamp on it. If you feel working hard, you've crossed the whole ocean for coming here to work hard to have a better life for your family. If you're escaping war because you know that there's a place where you will feel safe, then Europe is your place and you can become European.
Chciałem się zapytać, no bo tutaj wszyscy Państwo mówili o tym, że była mowa o tym, że generalnie europejskość daje nam pewne przywileje. No, jeżeli daje nam pewne przywileje, to daje nam też pewne obowiązki. Każdy z nas urodził się w jakimś państwie, no może też poza tym państwem, przebywa z ludźmi, którzy są danego narodu i mam takie pytanie, czy generalnie przez to nie jesteśmy nauczeni pewnych postaw, nie wnikamy w pewną mentalność i czy tym samym, tutaj brakuje mi słowa, nadal czy z uwagi na tę mentalność możemy być tymi Europejczykami? Czy mamy szansę na to, żeby wyzbyć się naszych nacjonalizmów i tej naszej mentalności, której jesteśmy może nauczeni, może ona jest już wśród nas, że tak powiem, my ją mamy od urodzenia? I czy możemy się tego wyzbyć na rzecz Unii Europejskiej, na rzecz projektu europejskości, która jest gdzieś nienazwana, gdzieś niedookreślona, jest pewnego rodzaju taką, można powiedzieć, utopią, czy taką zagadką, tak? To jest rzecz, której my nie znamy i którą dopiero możemy poznawać. Pytanie, czy rzeczywiście możemy się wyzbyć naszych takich cech narodowych? Czy to jest możliwe w ogóle? Czy to się da zrobić po prostu?
It looks like the machines aren't working properly, unfortunately. The general sense of the question, as I understood it, is about the feasibility of this kind of construction. I'm sure there were depths there which I'm not picking up as well, but also the possibility, please correct me if I'm wrong, of whether there is any chance of whether the United States of Europe could be in any way like the United States of America, whether something like that could be built. Was this the sense of your question? Okay. Yeah.
Firstly, I'm really sorry that I couldn't hear your question. The headphones aren't broadcasting in English, so forgive me if I don't answer it properly. I would say it's probably not desirable to want a United States of Europe built like America. Our strength is that we don't have to have this top-down arrangement going on, and the very motto of the European Union is unity through diversity. So, pardon my French, but we need to get our shit together and actually work as Europeans and not have to bow to a higher level. We should just be friends by now, and actually we need to start learning and acting with solidarity, like I was saying before. We shouldn't need a superior power to impose that on us. So yeah, it's not desirable, and hopefully we can be more solid with one another, but at the moment I'm skeptical. I have proposed remedies, maybe if we could change the media and make it more enlightened. For me that's the biggest problem. Perhaps there are some educational reforms that could be made, like were being discussed before, but yeah, nothing's guaranteed. It's all in play, and we're very much at a crossroads at the moment, I think.
If I may also ask to your question, there is no need to get rid of our national identity. The point is not to get rid of our national identity. The point is to feel more European, because we can live with multiple identities.
nationality are historical construction as all the political organizations. Also the culture is somehow a political choice. So you can also choose to build another type of identity. Also is not to be constructed as the national identity, the national state identity, but a different type of identity. So also I think that also we have, when we give some element of European citizenship, we have also to say in this European education that we are part of the human being. There is something also bigger than the European identity. So it's not to be constructed as a new closed community, Europe, but an open community.
And just to point out one last thing, the slogan in the European Union is United in Diversity. That gives you a clue.
At this point, we take the next question. Gentleman in the front row.
Thank you. This year we commemorate 100 years of the Armenian genocide, and I would ask the panel how important for European identity, in your view, is this heritage, the tradition of the enormous crimes committed by Europeans throughout the history, and in some cases they were also brought by the imperialistic ideology outside of Europe, as the Armenian genocide case showed us. Thank you.
While writing this speech, I was thinking about this. And of course there are many questions to ask, like, is Europe the Europe of Auschwitz, or the Europe of Katyn, or the Europe of any other big genocides that happened here, or is Europe the Europe of Renaissance or art and so on? So we have to ask, and I suppose as Europeans we have to admit and to take all our history with us and the culture, so we can combine them together, and this is our culture. And I don't know what else I can say on this. Thank you.
I have a friend who would love your question and argue that Europe is united in genocides and mass murder. But I would like to think that, going back on what Stefan said, why can it be both? There are good things and bad things everywhere, to anything, to everyone. You do need to accept and admit and move on and try not to do it again if it's possible. But the whole point of this construction of an identity, a common identity, is just so people don't kill each other because they look different. They don't dehumanize them. They don't say, oh, they're not like us, because they look different. Their identity is different. They speak another language. They believe in a different religion. If you manage to create something that's bigger than all of those things, then there's less incentive to commit mass murder, I'd say.
Perhaps I might comment at this point and ask everyone to take a look around us with regard to the tradition and heritage of European civilization. Everything in this room proclaims this is part of European civilization. This is a civilization that reaches back 2,000 years and more from the end of the 18th century. You've got a symbol of strength and virtue, the Farnese Hercules at one end. You've got the symbol of beauty, the Apollo Belvedere at the other. In other words, you have the attribute of a republic at one end, and you've got the kind of higher purpose of humanity at the other. You've got pagan gods. You've got sort of versions of fresques that were originally created in the Vatican by Raphael at the start of the 16th century. You have, in other words, an interior which here at the northeastern frozen wastes of the periphery of Europe is proclaiming this is Europe and this is European civilization. It's not anti-Christian, but it is pre-Christian. Perhaps I'd like to ask, how much of that still makes sense at the beginning of the 21st globalized century? How much have we lost touch with the roots of what at the end of the 18th century was still obvious to every educated European? Members of the audience are welcome to pick up that one as well. Michele.
So one word is the problem of globalization, of, if you want, the development of type of society also of consumers, and the humanistic culture. You made reference to humanistic culture. Yeah, Hercules maybe is also part of somehow of humanistic culture, but is the symbol of the war that also was the root of Europe. The war against Persia built the identity of the Greeks as old. No? So now we have this problem that we have a problem of peace and war, and European identity, as Chris underlined, is the identity of peace, also to answer about our own mistakes, our civil wars, our tragedy in terms of genocide, and to this long history of war. But the wars is something that is still there in the world. And then you have this process of economical unification, there is globalization, that is really problematic also in terms of identity, because a lot of people now in the world, they identify themselves about also the products of this production, and not about the humanistic culture. Someone also asked, is still possible the poetry in our civilization, in our economical civilization? We have a lot of people, they cannot enjoy the poetry, for example. And that, for me, is a problem.
On another point then, and that is this question of a European nation, whether that Stefan raised in particular, that whether a European construction should aspire to be another kind of nation, to replicate the same kind of mechanisms for building participation as citizens, for inspiring loyalty to a territory or an idea, that nations have tried and used over the last few centuries, or whether it should try to be something different altogether. Recently I heard the expression, I think it was during our study trip in Lithuania, sometimes the day before yesterday has more to tell us than yesterday. Are there things further back that might be better sources of inspiration for a European construction than trying to replicate the nation state, or, for example, the United States of America, only better?
I'd say no to the idea of a European nation. I don't think that's a good starting point, because, nation states throughout their history have just had wars and others, and nationalism and exclusion, and even minorities within countries. You mentioned the Baltic states, and I think that's a good example of how the idea of a nation. I'm not a big fan of the idea of the nation. And when you know something that exists, when you have a model with all its problems, and you have an opportunity to create something new, why would you replicate something that doesn't work?
Well, perhaps not all nations have been failures in exactly the same degree.
That's not what I meant.
Yes.
That's not what I meant.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, the general point of why, which is what I was getting at in the first place, of why try to replicate something that hasn't worked very well.
I mean the nation state, the nation states, not the national identities.
Yeah, the difference between the nation state and national identity.
Yes, that's what I meant. Everything I said, it was for nation states. Oh, I can't speak now. Nation states.
Alexander?
Yes, thank you. My question is whether we need a predefined goal in this enormous process. Chris has mentioned that what Europe lacks today is ambition and daring. And it may sound very idealistic. I believe I've already been as idealistic as, as it can get. But how about we work towards being united, being kind to each other, look after each other. Let's be ambitious at this, at being good citizens of our respective countries. It really doesn't matter of which country, but I think the notion and the ideals of citizenship as such need more people to follow them truly. And these are the details of everyday life, of paying your taxes on time, and being kind to your fellow citizens, to your neighbors, I mean, in your house that you inhabit, that make Europe from the ground to the top.
Perhaps easier to pay taxes on time if you have confidence that those taxes are going to be wisely spent and not be spent on corruption. That lack of confidence, something that Michele brought up to start with, this défiance he referred to, that so many see not only their own national governments, but in some cases to an even greater degree the European central institutions as a kind of leviathan in the sort of the Hobbesian sense, something to be feared rather than something to be participated in.
Yes, but absolutely, but this is a vicious circle from which it's very hard to break out. I do not trust my government, so I can cheat as much as I want on my taxes, if we put out the tax question. And, well, the government knows that everybody's cheating, so they'll be more and more oppressive in looking for the culprits of that cheating, etc., and it never ends. So somebody needs to be the good guy there and hope for the best.
More questions from the front row, please.
First of all, I'll just make say my opinion what is Europe, and I'll pick on the Cardolan's phrase, which was more striking for me, like belonging nowhere. But to me, it's belonging. Europe for me, it means like belonging somewhere, which doesn't necessarily. Which kind of doesn't prevent one from feeling as a part of the whole, which is Europe, and Europe is giving this possibility and opportunity to somewhere. So without abolishing this feeling of something national. And but while listening to you, I had a feeling that you, while talking about Europe, you're just referring to the Union, European Union. So my question is, what are your feelings if you go beyond the EU? So because Europe is something beyond EU, and so what are your views? How you see kind of geographical borders of the EU? How do you it's very popular now to talk about the Europeanization of, for example, Eastern neighborhood or Balkans or so on. So what do you see them as Europe? Because I don't think that even probably in the education system, I don't think that there is much information given to the people about this area, right? So people do not may not really consider it as a part of Europe, which I believe that it is part of Europe. But so what's your view on that?
So we have, I think, 2 points that are overlapping points. One is the distinction between the European Union and its institutions and its member states and Europe as a whole, and the other is about the possible limits of Europe. Where might Europe begin and end, or are there indeed any potential limits to what Europe could or should be? Stefan first.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very interesting question. As I made my point at the beginning, my country was not in Europe in the 90s, and then suddenly it entered Europe. Not on the map, of course. So this is it's a very good question. For example, take for example the Republic of Moldova. Is the Republic of Moldova European? Of course it is. But for some, Republic of Moldova it's not European. And why? Because we always tend to separate, not to separate, but to compare us with, this is one way to define what is European and not. You compare yourself with the other, and then you see who you are not. So, is Republic of Moldova European? I would say yes. Some technocrats from Brussels would say no. Some Moldovans would say yes. Some Moldovans would say no. It depends on how they perceive themselves. Geographically, of course, Moldova is Europe, Albania is Europe. Some other countries, which are Bosnia is Europe. Your country is Europe. It depends always on how do you feel, I think. Russia is Europe. 30% of Russia is Europe. But is Russia Europe? We don't know.
Okay. Chris?
I don't think anyone in their right mind would say that Moldova is not part of Europe. They would say it's not part of the European Union, but Europe, no. I think it's an interesting question, and it comes from the fact that Europe is the only continent in the world that doesn't have a very clear geographical border. You ask everyone here where exactly it is, and they don't know. And I don't know. Some people will say it's the beginning of the Caucasus, which rules out Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Some people will say it includes them. Some people will say it's the whole of Turkey and Russia. Some will say it's part. So you're using like a small body of water that has traffic going across it every day as your border. Well, that's not very clever. You go to the Russian part, everyone says, oh, it's the Urals that are the border. But have you ever gone on Google and looked at the images for the Urals? They're not like a big, jagged line of mountains that you can't cross. People cross them all the time. They're basically hills. It's arbitrary. And so we need to rethink about what Europe is. If you want a geographical one, fine. But I don't think that does our ambition any merit. Europeanism has stretched across the world. We have 4 corners. So I think the European Union, its project, was the first step, was to unite what we commonly call Europe, the geography of it, which, fair enough, it's obviously countries like Germany, France, but it's also further east, and hopefully one day it will also be Russia. But maybe one day we need to think broader, and we need to think across the Atlantic to North and South America, and maybe we need to think even beyond that. But it's about taking it step by step. It's easier to unite people next door to each other than it is to quickly go and bring Australia in, except for things like Eurovision. So, yeah, bit by bit.
I just wanted to clear up a point. I never said being European means not belonging anywhere. It was a very personal comment because I'm technically not from Europe, but I feel European. That's why I said it. I don't mean to say that being European should be about belonging nowhere. I actually agree with you about the European identity and Stefan's point about multiple identities and everything. As for what Europe is, geographically, because I made this statement about how I feel European, I don't feel like anyone can really make that decision for someone else. It's very hard to say, let's look at the countries and decide if they're European or not. I think it's much more complicated than that. I wouldn't feel confident answering that question.
Okay, thank you. We have 2 questions already, both in the front row at the ends, please.
Dziękuję bardzo za udzielenie głosu. Andrzej Wielowiejski, były wieloletni członek Zgromadzenia Parlamentarnego Rady Europy, a także poseł do Parlamentu Europejskiego. Bardzo dziękuję za zaproszenie i jestem wdzięczny za tę debatę, która jak dotąd była rzeczywiście żywa i bogata. Z wieloma rzeczami bardzo się zgadzam, że chciałbym je wesprzeć, na przykład koncepcja jednak edukacji europejskiej. Powoli, może stopniowo, ale trzeba wejść na tę drogę, a są opory. Dobrze byłoby, żeby na odcinku czy to podatków, czy to wspólnej armii, czy wspólnych zadań w tym zakresie ta świadomość europejska się pogłębiała. Wypowiadam jedną tezę, a z kolei zadam wam pytanie. Moja taka elementarna teza jest, że oczywiście europejskość, ta moja świadomość Europejczyka, ta moja tożsamość europejska jest przecież oczywiście wartością dodaną. To jest wartość dodana do mojej tożsamości społecznej, regionalnej, etnicznej, religijnej. To jest wartość dodana. No i bardzo się ona różnie dodaje. I chyba jest dość istotne, może nie powiedzieliśmy tego dostatecznie mocno, jest ona słaba. Poczucie tej wartości dodanej wśród tych 500 milionów Europejczyków jest słabe i niewielkie. I teraz zapytanie pod Państwa adresem dotyczy problemu, bo o tym żeście nie mówili. Jak oceniacie w tym procesie rozwoju, pogłębiania, zmiany świadomości europejskiej, jak oceniacie znaczenie i funkcjonowanie opinii publicznej? Ponieważ w moim przekonaniu i z moich doświadczeń i walk na terenie parlamentów stwierdzam, że to jest taka bardzo istotna słabość, bo my jesteśmy wszyscy mniej lub więcej zainteresowani tym, co się u nas dzieje, natomiast nie uświadamiamy sobie, że znaczna część, 30, 40, może i 50 parę procent naszych problemów gospodarczych, naszego bytowania, warunków życia coraz bardziej zależy lub zależeć będzie od Unii Europejskiej, od decyzji politycznych dalekich od nas, nieznanych nam na ogół instytucji europejskich, które coś tam uzgadniają i decydują. I my dyskutujemy w naszych krajach o naszych problemach budżetowych, oświatowych, takich czy innych, natomiast jest to rzeczą charakterystyczną również dla mediów europejskich. Niewiele bardzo dyskutuje się i mówi się o wspólnych problemach Europy. Po prostu nie ma takiego zapotrzebowania. Dziennikarze i ludzie z mediów tego nie robią, ponieważ odbiorcy tego nie bardzo chcą i się tym nie interesują. Pytanie pod Państwa adresem, w jaki sposób rozbudzić, rozwinąć, pogłębić, tak powiem, pobudzić myślenie europejskie i odbiór tych bardzo istotnych dla nas praktycznie, a nie uświadamianych sobie przez nas wspólnych problemów europejskich. Jak tworzyć wspólną opinię europejską i debatę europejską, w której brałoby udział dostateczna liczba, zaangażowałaby się w swojej świadomości dostateczna liczba obywateli tych 500 milionów ludzi, które w ogromnej większości, jeżeli chodzi o Europę, to dalej są w takim półśnie.
Dziękuję bardzo panu za podniesienie tego bardzo ważnego pytania. After having drawn our attention to the European identity being something added to other identities, ethnic, local, national, state, religious, or whatever, the question then becomes, how does the question of European affairs become attractive and interesting to public opinion as a whole, given that most of the 500 million people in Europe seem to treat it as something extremely distant or indifferent?
Well, in my opinion, that might be a bit controversial, but the European Union simply has the wrong focus. It's always about, whenever you try to see European news, it's trade deals, the economy, fiscal policy, borders, and things people just don't care about, either because they don't understand or because they think they can't affect anything or do anything about it, just laws and directives and regulations. And it's always based on trade. It's the only part that works, the free movement of workers and goods and open market and everything, which is really good and people really profit from it. But going back to the point, people do profit from things without realizing, and they can still be against what's putting them in place. That's because you lack the human element. The human element is lacking in the European Union. Try writing something on cultural policy or languages, or just try doing anything that's not well, I won't say about politics, but about politics, the kind of politics people don't really pay attention to. And you're gonna be laughed at, or you're gonna be considered trivial. I recently read a quote from Jean Monnet, which I thought was really striking. It says, if I could do it again, I would start with culture. Because that's the point, that's why people don't care about the European Union, that's why people feel like they don't belong to it, because in their daily lives, nothing changed. Not everyone can travel. So if you're still in, I don't know, Estonia, in a small village, and the European Union is about transatlantic trade deals to you, you're not going to care about the European Union.
Thanks for your question, Andre. I would say on bad things, the media is very, very good at covering European issues. So there was a period when all we spoke about was Greece. There is a period now when all we speak about is Syrian refugees, and often in a not very nice way. But the problem is all this good stuff that's happening, all this useful and important stuff is not being covered, as you rightly point out. And I mean, we all have a part of the responsibility for that, in the fact that you're saying we don't want to hear it. Well, people need to want to hear it, and that partly comes from developing this awareness early on. So parents and grandparents need to speak to their children about times when they weren't able to access other countries, they weren't able to benefit from all of the privileges this is brought. We need to have more language tuition and more awareness. I should be able to come here and speak to you in Polish. It's rubbish that I can't. But also we need to lobby media organizations. Like, not all the media in Europe is driven by a profit incentive, although far too much is. Some of it is public service broadcasting. So why can't things like the BBC be approached and say, okay, rather than having European news under world news, put it as a different section, put it as something in between UK and world. Don't make it foreign. And that's something easy we could do. We could also work on multinational news outlets, and I work for one on a voluntary basis, and it's in 5 European languages, and you know we need to do more of that and spreading information and making it more accessible to people as well. So there's a lot to do, but we all have part of the burden to make it better, I think.
Or maybe I could just take one more question now. There was one in the front row, since we... 2 more questions, as long as they're very short questions. We have also a film to show you. So front row first and then the second row. Second row first and then the front row.
I would like to stick to this culture question, because you criticized the nation state before. Don't you think that culture may be much more dangerous than economic or citizenship based on paper passports or things like that? Because we already had a question here whether an Algerian-born French citizen is European or not. And if we think that culture means something that is inclusive, we can exclude this person. Well, I would say the Islamic State is very much European, because many of its ideologies were trained in Europe, or they think in very postmodern ways. So actually, I had the feeling in the beginning of this discussion that you would like to replace one identity with another identity. I know we had already this discussion that is not exactly the same, but that Europe is like a handicapped sister of America. In America, it's already properly done, with the American identity being above the local Irish or Greek or Polish. So China would be the ideal for us, because they already you have 1.5 million people with Chinese identity, and then they are from Sichuan or from Fujian or other places. So the problem is that, and it's my perennial problem myself, so 1,000 years ago, we gave up our tribal identity and we adopted European identity. And once in Tanzania, I had to fill in a hotel my tribe, and I was completely out of idea because I don't know which tribe I'm. My parents are from different parts of Poland, so I know what is a tribe, but I couldn't answer the question. So, and now we are, if we construct identity, we construct it by excluding the others, by claiming that we are, in a way, special, better, or we can also construct Europe as Europe of Auschwitz, of course, but still there is some kind of exclusivism. So don't you think that if we put too much stress on culture, we will be at risk of excluding the other parts of the world? But one last comment. There was a funny argument that Europe is in a way unique because its borders are undefined. Well, how about Asia? Are not the same orders if you look from the Asian side? So it's again, I think we don't think about it, but it's European exclusivism again, very strong. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure that I agree that having an other to create your identity means that you think the other is bad or less. I think, well, that's not the point I was trying to make. When you say you're European, I don't think it should be about, we're European, so we're better. It can be that we're just European, so we're different from that person, but that doesn't mean that they're in any way worse or, their identity shouldn't be taken into account. That's not what I meant to say. I wanted to clear that. And as for culture, I mean culture in the European Union, as in cultural policies, sharing cultural events, just like Michele said, with a common European literary canon. That's what I mean by culture. I mean TV shows, I mean films, I mean people going around giving talks, I just mean creating common references, because that's very important. And who you are is really in what you're exposed to throughout your life. And yes, it is about history to a certain extent, and I'm treading in dangerous waters in this room full of historians. But I don't really think it should be about what happened to your ancestors 2,000 years ago. It should be about what you're experiencing in your daily life. And that's what I meant to say by culture and also the other, because you don't necessarily need the other to be bad to have an identity. And also, personally, myself, I'm not thinking of replacing an identity with the other. I'd rather people had a lot of identities, as many identities as possible. Go into a room, mingle with people, and just be themselves and be okay. So it's not, and in multiple rooms, not just in one room, not just in one group of people. So maybe one identity, but a very wide one.
Okay, there's been a lot of points touched upon, but first and foremost, I do not criticize a nation state. I do criticize, however, those who think that being a national of one country makes you a better person than another human being. This is a very crooked idea of cultural identity, which I do not accept. I believe nobody should accept it. And this is where the European idea, but the word European, you could replace it with any other word. The European identity should start from this, from unity understood as feeling equal and granting that same condition to your fellow human beings.
Okay, Okay. It kind of goes back to this idea of thinking about the days before the day before, actually. And I think that we can be insanely proud of aspects of our culture and very shameful of others. And I don't think that necessarily excludes people. And the reason I say this is because I don't take a national approach to my model of Europe. I take one that predates that. I focus more on the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth or the Roman Empire. And they were both very proud of where they came from, but they were also both incredibly welcoming of new people coming in. Citizenship was something that you could acquire. You didn't have to wait 20 years like you do in some European countries to get it. It was something that you could do by wanting to get involved and help in any way you can. You had a situation where at the border between what is roughly the border between what is now England and Scotland, you had Syrian soldiers making sure the crazy barbarians were kept out. Today, people in those towns, they'd be terrified if they heard there was a Syrian there because they hear all this bad stuff that's not necessarily true. And it's because we've kind of gone back from this idea of being inclusive to one of being exclusive. And that's what needs to change. But that doesn't mean we can't be proud of our culture. And I think actually it's something that should be part of our culture and something that we should be proud of as well.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one final question. The front row, third, please.
Shortly, my first question is, there is one country where people died for Europe recently, and that is Ukraine. We didn't hear about it. What is your take on Ukraine today, and how do you relate to it? Second question, very practically, we are speaking about something which looks like European identity in a way or in another. How do you see the possible linguistic policies of Europe? Because basically to have a public space and a feeling of common fate, it's whether you have one common language, whether you solve the problem in another way, but you have to tackle the issue, because if people don't communicate, you don't make a community. That's it.
Thank you very much. So the question of Ukraine and the question of common language. Who'd like to answer? You don't have to answer both of the questions. If you're welcome to just answer one of them, as long as we get one answer to each question.
Okay. So I'll start from the second question. Interpreter by profession myself. I believe there's one thing that we're lacking. I wouldn't like to, certainly, to take the job opportunities from my colleagues or from myself. So I believe still translators and interpreters are very much needed and should be in the future. What we do lack, however, is a more comprehensive approach to what intercultural and interlinguistic communication is. The problem being that you can teach your kids or other people as many languages as you want to a certain level, but there's always this imbalance. You can speak 10 languages, but none of them in an equal way, on an equal level. And there's a tendency, which has been researched into, that if somebody with whom, saying you're Polish, you speak to someone who is not Polish, but does speak Polish to a certain extent, but not as good as you, obviously, you tend to see them as inferior and, to speak in a less parliamentary way, as stupid. Or you're just more likely to perceive them as such. So, whereas the acquisition of linguistic skills is a lengthy process and there's no guarantee of success, then we could at least teach our kids more tolerance and make them aware that the fact that somebody doesn't speak the language doesn't make you any better or doesn't make them any worse than you.
About the first question, what happened in Ukraine with this Euromaidan demonstration and then civil revolution is really amazing, because Europe was reference to prosperity, to democracy, real democracy. So in that way, this is also an answer to the previous question about the cultural identity of Europe, or the general question. I think that this of democracy, the complex history of democracy, we see also now. This is the stronger identity of Europe and is a normative identity also for the rest of the world. Not exporting democracy, as the Americans, they try sometime, but like to give this suggestion to the rest of the world. We are in prosperity also because
democracy. And there are also economical studies about that. For example, if you take Amartya Sen, they also told about multiple identity. He demonstrated in his economical studies that you have the best management of economics in democratic context.
I think the situation in Ukraine is a very sad one. I wouldn't want to romanticize it, and this Maidan didn't start because they wanted to join Europe. It started because they were angry about corruption in their own country. Now they want to associate more with Europe, and that's a good thing, and I think it's shameful that we haven't done all that we can to help them as Europe. The fact that there are Dutch people now wanting a referendum to have an association agreement, they don't even know what this agreement is, and they want a referendum on it. It's for stupid reasons, and I don't accept it. But I think it's an opportunity for Poland, and I think Poland has a long history of working with Ukraine, and I think they have a responsibility to be a loud voice in the European Union to help the rest of us to understand that country better and to understand how we can help. Poland can do that, and I hope that in the next few years it doesn't turn away from its responsibility to do that. But the one thing I do want to add is not to forget Russia. The European project includes them too. They're not excluded from it. And there are people in Russia now who have to deal with Vladimir Putin, and a lot of them probably don't want to, despite what Russia Today polls might tell you. And so we have to remember that the door to Europe also has to be open to them too. We have to welcome all Europeans, regardless of where they're from.
Going back to language policy, I think that it actually ties to my point from earlier that it's extremely important to have language policies or any kind of language education, really. But that maybe it's also about the national versus European education point we made earlier, that languages are just not important in some countries and are very important in some countries, and you can really see the difference in the way you interact with people. And I really don't think you can teach anyone to be tolerant of people trying to speak a foreign language without having had any sort of foreign language education. It's not about, no, it's about, I was kind of answering Oleg. And it's not about cramming 10 languages and knowing how to say your name in 10 languages. But I really do think everyone should have to, at school, yes, have to learn at least 2 languages really well. I don't know if it's possible to learn 3 or 4 languages really well, because learning a language really well is not that easy. But if more focus is put on languages at school, because you see people, when you go to school, if you don't care about languages and if you have no incentive to learn, language classes are useless. But people, for example, really study for maths, cram for maths, because they've been told that that's the important thing they have to do. And languages, they're just some hours they fill. So that's what needs to change.
Okay, thank you. Final comment, Stefan.
Yes, regarding Ukraine, I would definitely say that Ukraine is European, of course. Now, it's also part of the Eastern Partnership of the European Union. They make trade with European Union. As Commissar Hahn said, in the next 5 years of his mandate, European will not enlarge anymore. So that we know for sure that in the next 5 years there will be no Ukraine in the European Union. And of course, taking into account what's happening there, the developments, of course, it will not be part of the European Union maybe for more than 5 years. It's in a process of Europeanization because of the relations with the European Union. So maybe in the future it will have some standards regarding democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and somehow this conflict that is happening there will be settled in one way or another. We don't know yet how, but probably it will stay like this for a long time.
Thank you. I wanted just to say one last thing. I agree with all the comments of all my colleagues regarding Ukraine. Also, I wanted to say that all what is happening with Ukraine shows that we also have a lack of communication, what is already said before. I have the impression, I want to know more about what's happening to Ukraine, but we have a problem not only with languages, but with media. They do not show us what is really happening. This reminds me, the other day, 1 week ago, with some Ukrainian colleagues, projected a documentary showing us what was happening in Ukraine during the Maidan demonstrations. I was amazed. I didn't know anything. My national medias didn't show me that. I didn't know anything about it. So how can I have an opinion about what is happening if those news don't reach me? I really have to dig into it, really be interested in order to know about it. And this makes me crazy, really, because it's there, it's Ukraine, it's in our neighborhood. Why do I have more information about other countries in the world rather than Ukraine? What is happening with us?
Thank you very much, Christina. This isn't the end of the evening, because there is still a film on a similar subject which has been prepared by the Geremik Foundation for us to see. So in a minute, the members of the panel will take a seat among the audience. Before we do this, though, I would like, first of all, again to express our thanks on behalf of the College of Europe to the Royal Łazienki Museum and to the director, Mrs. Zichovic, and our thanks for entertaining us here in these amazing surroundings. Our pleasure, I'm very sure. I'd like also to thank Jolanta Kurska, the chairwoman of the Bronisław Geremik Foundation, for proposing that we take this slot in their series of European Wednesdays, and we look forward to continuing our cooperation in future. For all of the excellent and penetrating comments and questions that came from the audience, and above all to our 6 panelists who have given of themselves, who have thought and felt what does it mean to be European in all sorts of different ways, and I think all of us are greatly enriched by the experience. So thank you all very much in 6 different languages.
European identity?
I think that in my experience, I have quite a long tradition in my family in feeling like a European because my parents have been already traveling across Europe, and they were exchanging their philosophy, life philosophy, but as well as knowledge between European citizens, and not only. Because we're talking about Europe and being European, and I wonder, is it something what we're considering just geographically, or is this something more? Because in meeting different people from different countries, from different continents, I have realized that their values very similar to European ones or European values present in another countries which are outside Europe. So is being a European just citizen of Europe geographically, or is being a European something more? Is it a term which includes much more than this?
How is it for you? Because your mother is Bulgarian, your father is Polish.
Yes. I was, they met in Moscow and I was born in Moscow. And then I have chosen to settle in another country than those three ones. So for me, today, being a European is feeling free, feeling as a free woman, where I'm able to vote, where I'm able to travel and to be an ambassador of European culture and traditions outside Europe. So I think it is connected to freedom.
So we were talking earlier that the idea of European identity is not new. What do you think about it?
Yes, I have studied the lives of quite famous people in different fields of art, of science, and I have realized that actually the idea of European citizen already existed between artists, between scientists many years ago. And the difference between 18th century, 19th century and today is that actually everybody can travel, and within Europe, and that's why we see that in the 19th century there have been people or groups of people which were living the idea of united Europe. So if we think about where does Europe go and what is the future of Europe, maybe we should search if we have groups of people or societies which are living ahead of our European times. And let's look how will they live today and how maybe will our Europe look in the future.
Do you have any ideas what kind of groups, which groups could be this avant-garde groups looking ahead, thinking ahead of us?
I have been thinking about this, but I'm still not sure which one of them. Maybe there should be several groups concerned, and maybe we should look about communities which live with European values outside Europe.
Okay, thank you very much. Daphne, do you believe there is such a thing as European identity? And if so, what would this mean for you?
I would have to argue that it is very positive that people are discussing the idea of a European identity, a more coherent identity in terms of the peoples and countries involved in the EU and the process. But to me, it is a different world. I'm from Turkey, and I'm not from a country that is a member of EU. I've never lived in EU. And to me, EU, I'm afraid, resonates with othering, not on a personal level, but on the level of the passport that I carry. Because whenever I travel, I've faced with certain difficulties. Last year I was in Rome, and the friend I met there asked me why I was there, and I said, all right, I'm here for an Erasmus exchange. And she said, you're not EU, how do you have Erasmus exchange? And I said, all right, that's the only thing we're allowed to have, the exchange. And I'm here for a week, so let's just spend our time together, and I'll be back to my Middle Eastern country. I arrived yesterday. I couldn't travel with the group from France to Germany because I didn't have my visa in time. I applied 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I ought to have received my visa 2 weeks ago, but there was something wrong with the American visa system. They closed it down, so the Greek consulate closed its visa program down, and I had to pull strings. I reached the secretary of the consul, but still I had to miss my flight, and I had to get this ticket to fly to Warsaw direct. So to me, EU is a certain amount of difficulty, but perfect for the members, I would say. Mm-hmm. Or I would again like to hear what the members are feeling and thinking, especially the new members, the way Poland is, mm-hmm. or the Czech Republic is. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
In general, it's a really difficult question to answer. So let me say, what does it mean for me to be European? I've been traveling quite a lot around Europe. I visited many countries, and I have my friends almost in every European country. And when I go to these places, to the other countries, and when I talk with these people, I can see that even though they have different color of skin, or they have different religion or different approach to their lives, we all share some experience. We all share the same interest. We all share the same expectations toward our lives. We also share the same fears. When I talk with these people from the other countries, from the other European countries, like I feel that it's like talking with my Polish friends, you know, that we are kind of all the same. I don't see the difference. We watch the same films. We have very similar sense of humors. We laugh about the same things in the internet. We speak the same, you know, English, simple English, and I basically feel like home. Like it doesn't make a big difference for me to be somewhere else. And for me, for a 25-year-old girl, that's what that means to be a European. Just to go somewhere and feel like at home.
Ziza, what does it mean for you, European identity? Do you believe there is such thing?
So it's really interesting. I think that it's a subject complex, and I'm French, and I think that Europe, I believe that Europe represents human values. For example, I travel many times in Europe, and I met many people really different, and I study with many people who are English or from England or from Spain, for example. I think that I have many identity, not just one. I have my identity from my history, personal history, and from my family history, for my country also, because I believe that we don't have just one identity, because we met some people who are from, for example, I study in Japan, and I live there during 1 year. So now I can say that I have also sometimes some Japanese, I'm like some Japanese sometimes, because when I'm talking, I'm thinking about that sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So what does it mean for you, European identity? Do you carry European identity, or what does it mean for you?
I think identity is a kind of construction, and I think it's in relation with the other, the self and the other, and the relationship of the two. I think as well that identity is changing according to the context. So today in Greece, it's a quite difficult context that changes our perspective of European identity. So I guess that a dream of a European construction and a Europe of people is fading a bit away because of financial problems and austerity measures. So I think that it's quite difficult to respond to this question, because I feel that it would be nice to participate in a Europe for people, but this is not the case today.
Mm-hmm. So you're disappointed of what is happening now, the reaction towards Greek crisis?
I don't know.
Are you disappointed with Europe?
I cannot say so, because Europe, it's not only its politicians, so it's also relationship with people, between people. But in the political level, I feel that there is no solidarity towards Greece today.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What does it mean for you, European identity?
Well, from what I observed here in Europe, identity is more than just something that people, like a common mindset or common belief, like in a closed circle of people. Here in Europe, we have different ethnic minorities that is not disconstructed like they were in the melting pot of the United States, for example. They're coexisting, but they're preserving their own culture. So for me, the main, at least the main prospect of European identity is actually a kinder or gentler integration. For me, the European identity also poses a very, very strong challenge among the European people, because nobody ever done that before, and nobody ever actually succeeded in creating some sense of common identity among the Aboriginal settlements, Aboriginal culture, people who has been living in place for thousands of years as their forerunners, as their ancestors been living there as French people, German people, Polish people. So it poses a great challenge, because in order to form a common identity, actually it requires an empathy, at least. Empathy, like in immigrant countries, they have the same empathy, like they're being stranger in strange land, so they form a new type of identity. But here, the people are locals in different lands, and most of them don't have the experience being a stranger in a strange land, not to say being the minorities in like a massive dominant culture like in Germany or in France. So it is, for me, the greatest challenge for the European people to have identity is actually the empathy, like between the minorities and the majorities. And I think we're actually working on that, because there's a Fulbright program, there are Erasmus programs, the younger generation have become more internationalized. They identify themselves not as locals, not as this particular identity. So yes, everybody has a sub-identity as a nationalist identity, but it's no longer the priority of such identity. Mm-hmm. So their vision has been enlarged, and yeah, it's a slow process, but we're working on that.
And we talked earlier, we talked also about fear. Mm-hmm. And fear connected to identity, and in particular connected to losing of the identity. How do you see this?
Well, as an Asian, I am slowly losing some traditional identity of mine, but that actually doesn't have to do with anything with fear, because the fear is actually the lack of self-confidence or the lack of a sustainable circle of gratification, of validation. So if you are living in the modern world, you are individualistic and you are a strong person, being a stranger in a strange world, you're being adventurous, you're growth-minded, it doesn't really matter what kind of identity you have as your top priority. So you always adapt as you go. That is my identity, at least. But for the confused teenagers here, they're just going through a very difficult phase. We're transiting between traditional structurized society to a more atomized, deconstructed, individualistic world. So I think there's a problem that happens in the entire world in the postmodern age, not entirely European.
Okay, but how do you think, where does this fear come from? Fear from even middle-class people in France, in Germany, you know, having this anti-immigrant sentiments. How do you see it? Why is it happening so?
I think that is actually comes from the sense of restlessness or the anxiety that's caused by their so-called disturbed peaceful life. So they're not really a multicultural society to begin with. So I think the process of here in Europe actually begin to develop into a multicultural, multi-ethnic society. There has to be some kind of clash. There has to be some kind of a fear of the minority or the immigrants. So yes, there is, but it's beginning of the process. It's something people have to go through. And also this fear, from my opinion, is originated from the uneasiness and the clash between the traditional mindset and also their so-called imposed or their rationality that is supposed to be tolerant, supposed to avoid conflict, supposed to build a super ego, in their super ego to build a better world, but in their subconsciousness they'll have some traditional and conservative thoughts. So I think that's some inner struggle, some kind of inner struggle, and they're not consistent with themselves. They're not self-confident with this particular inner conflict. So that's the anxiety, that's the fear, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Sylvia, tell me, what does it mean for you to be a European? Does it mean anything? Is there anything like European identity?
I think that in my experience, I have quite a long tradition in my family in feeling like a European, because my parents have been already traveling across Europe. And they were exchanging their philosophy, life philosophy, but as well as knowledge between European citizens, and not only. Because we're talking about Europe and being European, and I wonder, is it something what we're considering just geographically?
fun.